Welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd podcast. Last episode ended with Brian, Heather, and Derek needing to pull together a contract to meet the bank's requirements for their loan. Since this is Derek's first rodeo, he doesn't have anything, but they feel like they can draft something together that will make them and the bank happy. Let's see how that goes. At the coffee shop, Heather leans her head back and takes a deep breath. This used to be her happy place. Derek says that he did some digging and found some templates online that they can download. Heather says, just make sure it's specifically for a custom home build, because I want to make sure that you are building a high-end custom home. Derek says, I wouldn't want to build it any other way. Brian asked Derek if he'd gotten the links that they had emailed of some other home listings they liked. Derek's like, yeah, of course, those are nice, but they're really expensive. I'll be sure to keep those in mind, but I'll find some ways to keep the costs under control. Later that night, Derek sends them the completed contract. After carefully reading through, they agree that it looks good as far as they know. The next day, Brian, Heather, and Derek all add their signatures digitally, and it's official. The contract is signed. Right away, Brian emails the contract to the loan officer at the bank. To his surprise, he hears back within just a couple of days that the contract is accepted. And within a couple of weeks, the appraisal comes back good too. If it weren't for Heather being pregnant, Brian would be buying the most expensive bottle of champagne for them that night. Instead, he brainstorms which flowers to send her as he heads to the office. Meanwhile, Heather gives Rick a call to let him know their plans are finally becoming a reality. Rick says, that's great, and I'm glad you're keeping me posted, but did you reconsider maybe using one of the builders that I recommended? Heather says, no, they're still going to use Derek. And Rick was like, the Facebook guy? Yeah, we did find him through Facebook, she said, but he's built houses before. We actually just signed a contract with him, which is one of the reasons I called. Would you mind taking a look at the contract? Rick's like, yeah, send it over, but you really should have had a construction attorney look at this before you signed. Heather and Rick stay on the line while Rick reads through the contract. She hears lots of sounds coming from Rick as he scans it. Finally, he says, this looks like a template contract your builder pulled from a free website. I'm no attorney, and I'm not trying to pretend to be one, but from what I just read, Derek can do whatever he wants. Heather argues, that's what the plans are for, right? Rick says, well, it's more than that. Even the part about him following the plans that I made and the engineering aren't well defined. This almost looks like a purchase contract for a production house out in the suburbs where you just kind of get what you get. Y'all are spending a lot of money to build this house with no guarantee of results. I really wish you had sent this to a construction attorney before you signed, not have me look at it after the fact. Heather just rolls her eyes. Well, I guess it's too late to go back on that now. We'll just have to keep an eye on him. And you'll help with that too, right? Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast, your personal guide to the custom home construction process. I am your host, Curtis Lawson, and you hear me say this each week, but I keep repeating it because it's so important. We teach that every successful construction project must have 4 key components that are demonstrated by a very simple drawing of a house, like you might see a child sketch out. The foundation is planning, the left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof is proper execution. If all those components are strong, your project will succeed. And today's guest on the show is attorney, author, and fellow podcast host, Karalynn Cromeens. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're excited. Karalynn, you're the managing partner of the Cromeens law firm, right?
Yes, sir.
And you guys specialize in construction law.
Yes, sir.
So tell us about your background and your business.
Absolutely. So, I've been a construction litigator for the last 18 years. And we've done both litigation from the homeowner side and from the contractor side. And I really come at construction law having grown up in the industry. And so really what I'm really good at for both my owner clients and my contractor clients is breaking down the legal side of it into understandable chunks. So like having a contract that both parties can understand kind of thing.
Yeah. And you also have written a couple of books, right, that are geared toward contractors and subcontractors?
Yeah, so the first book I wrote was Quit Getting Screwed, and that's more for a commercial subcontractor, and that's negotiating all the terms that are in a commercial subcontract. And then the second one is quit getting stiffed, which is lien rights for Texas. So if, a contractor doesn't get paid, they know how to file a lien to collect their money.
And you also have your own podcast, which is the Quit Getting Screwed podcast.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep. So we talk about all the ways not to get screwed in the construction industry. And I have some fun guests on there too. Like I have Barbie the welder and just some very powerful women in the construction industry. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to get screwed in the construction business, both on the homeowner and contractor side.
Absolutely.
And so, our target audience here is homeowners, and although you mostly work with contractors, we have some contractors listening to this as well, I know. But I thought your perspective in working with builders will give our listeners and viewers some great insight into how they can avoid getting screwed.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, what we want is for everybody to have a successful project, to get what they paid for. The homeowner gets a happy ending. The contractor gets paid. That's the goal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what most contractors want too.
Yeah.
It just sometimes the wires gets crossed, right? And so that's what we try to prevent. Because I think we start out with the same goal. Somewhere along the line, if we're not clear, then we get off track.
Yeah. And no one goes into a project saying, I hope this ends in a lawsuit.
Exactly. Nobody wants to hire lawyers and spend time in the courtroom. Promise me. I promise you. Nobody wants to do that.
But it happens, and that's why you and I both always have work.
Yeah, exactly.
Things go wrong, unfortunately. In your experience, what are the most common causes of disputes between a contractor and a homeowner?
I think it's, number one, it starts with the contractor managing the homeowner's expectations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the contractor is normally an expert at what they do, they have to be clear and explain that process to the homeowner. Because what happens a lot of times, because it's what you do, you just assume everybody knows what you know. And the homeowner is coming out of the project from what they've heard or what they've seen on HGTV, which is not a realistic perspective. And if the contractor doesn't take the time to walk the homeowner through what this project's really going to look like, then we get crossways right from the front. Like, the possibility of change orders, all of those things are just have to be explained up front, an honest schedule, right? That's a big one that I see, is that, whether we're building someone's home or we're remodeling someone's home that they're in, that is their most sacred space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they want to know when you're going to be out of their house, and when they can move in, or, you know what I'm saying? And so it's a lot. And so being upfront and honest about the process, I think, is a lot of the times where things go south.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, communication, absolutely. Even the hard things, just say it like it is.
Yeah.
The lack of communication is I can't tell you how many of these cases I've tried that should never have gone to trial. And the first time, like, the parties talk really are at mediation. And you're like, you spent thousands of dollars to do, we could have done it before, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's lack of communication.
Yeah. Like you said, I mean, the home is like the most personal thing that you can deal with, aside maybe from someone's marriage. And oftentimes the marriage and the home are tied closely together. And so when you're dealing with that, emotions just naturally run high.
Absolutely. It's already that way. So the more that you can, explain the process and just be honest about it, the less likely because I teach contractors how to CYA, and I tell them to do that by explaining to the homeowner very clearly what's going to happen.
So when the relationship starts with the homeowner and the builder, if you start off with a loosely defined contract or poorly defined expectations, you're just setting it up for failure from the beginning. And, that document that defines the relationship is the contract, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And here's the thing about a contract. So you have two kinds of consumer homeowners: people that read everything very thoroughly and have lots of questions, and you have people that just sign it.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't manage expectations if you don't bother to read it. So I always tell my contractor clients, if it's clear, or if there's things in the contract that are very important, I would walk the customer through that just so that they know, have them initial, so that the contract is supposed to guide us. We don't want to be looking at it to figure out what we're supposed to do during the project, because then something's already gone awry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like you're getting married, but you never talk about expectations in the marriage. Like, hey, who's going to do the grocery shopping, and who has to buy all the Christmas presents, and who's going to pay the bills, or who's going to do the cooking? It's like you need to maybe have some of those conversations before you ever tie the knot, right?
Absolutely. And a good builder is very interested in what the homeowner wants, right? They come at a project from the perspective of, why are you doing this? Help me understand what your goals are, and more of a listener than they are a talker. That's what it should be.
Mm-hmm. So what makes a good contract?
So, having a clear term of exactly what the scope of work is, so all parties understand, are we going off drawings? Are we just, a scope of work? We're remodeling the kitchen. What does that include? What does that not include? So just being upfront about that. Being upfront about payment terms, right? When the contractor expects payment. And so, like, for a new build or a remodel, it might always not be 100% clear to the homeowner when payment is expected or when they reach that milestone. So I always tell my clients to put in their contract to invoice when they expect payment, and have the terms of what happens if payment's not received. And then what the contractor can do, what the owner can do if they disagree with the work that's been done, right? To have that process up front. Another big one is schedule, having the schedule in there. And like I tell my contractor clients, always go long. If you finish early, you're a hero. If you finish late, you're a zero. So
yeah.
Another big one is the possibility of change orders, and what the process would look like. Because unless you're in construction, when a homeowner goes to hire somebody, they're like, hey, they know what they're doing. This is the price. They don't realize that there could be other components that a contractor doesn't know.
Right.
And then I think another one that's hugely important for both contractors and owners is the punch out process. What that looks like, and that we have it in the contract that we're going to do one walkthrough. You're going to make your list. We're going to do that one walkthrough. We're going to do that one correction, and then after that, full payment's expected. And then after that, it's a warranty claim.
Yep.
Because a lot of the times we linger on a project of what is actually complete.
Right. I think what goes along with that too is, like, how do you define what what are the performance standards? Is what I'm trying. Like what standard are you holding the work to the judge, whether it's right or wrong?
Absolutely. And so there's some, so it depends on what kind of, that should be in the contract. So like the painting contractors, the PCA has a guideline. There's some general building guidelines that you can reference in the contract. That way, if something does happen, you'd be like, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable? Because here's what it also comes down to is, like, if something goes wrong, and the first thing the owner is going to do is hire an inspector. An inspector is going to go say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And potentially, it depends on what code we're judging it on, right? And so that's got to be listed in the contract. And so then, because I've seen a lot of the times, yes, you could do it this way, but it's also, you could do it this way. And the plans aren't clear.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily wrong. It's just not the way that inspector would do it.
I think most things that people argue about aren't even really code issues. They're more like cosmetic issues, which code has nothing to do with. The building code could care less what your drywall looks like, but that's really what people care about at the end of the day, at least at first, right? Is how does my paint job look, and
absolutely,
and things like that. So if you don't have those things defined, like what's the performance standard and what's the corrective action, that's a big opportunity for argument.
Absolutely, and just being clear. So like I always use a painting example. So like, the PCA has a standard that you have to stand 4 feet away from the wall to judge the paint, right?
In normal light.
Exactly. As opposed to somebody standing over your back with the flashlight. That's not, and so we're upfront about that. So we all know what to expect on the front end. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think every client, because I've seen it every time I build a house, they put their nose up by the wall and they look for tiny imperfections. And I always have to say, that's not reality. We have to stand, like you said, define it 3 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet, whatever. But normal light, you can't shine a spotlight on it to pick out dots.
Exactly.
And people care about that way more during the punch list process when they first move in than they do after they're living in the house.
No,
after they're living in the house, they're like, you're never going to see a dot on the wall.
No, exactly. And that's why I think, too, that we address the punch list in the contract, because as you're going through, homeowners, if they don't know that that's going to happen, can get anxious about the way you've kind of left things. Like if you're moving on to a different section and this one section's not 100% complete, and they can think that you're not finished, and you're saying that you're not going to finish. So I've seen that happen a lot too, in disputes that go sideways. So just being upfront that, yes, I'm mostly finished, but we realize that we have these punch items that need to be done, which will make it substantially complete.
So most builders, at least that I'm friends with in my circle, use kind of a standardized construction contract. Most of them use the TAB, the Texas Association of Builders contract. You do contracts as well. So it's pretty common for people to use kind of a standard form contract. If they don't have a standard form contract or a professionally written contract, is that a big red flag for somebody working with a builder?
Yes, depending on the project size, right? Too,
Yeah.
if you have like a small repair or something, and they don't have a full contract, like a couple pages, there's
Yeah.
not really. But if we're doing a new build or if we're doing a substantial remodel, having something that explains it's really, it shows the maturity of the builder, because it takes these guys to get a while to get that. So you're looking, if somebody has their contract, they know what it means. And here's the other thing too, is that contract doesn't have to be full of legalese to be effective.
Mhm.
And so, just because a contract doesn't have legalese doesn't mean it wouldn't be effective. And so
Right.
I think the better contract both parties should be able to understand. So like your standardized contracts, the builder should be able to answer, why is this in here?
Yeah. Most of them are like, I've never read that part either.
Exactly. And so, training the contractor and what that means so they can talk to the homeowner about what that means. And it's a standardized contract. So sometimes it's not relevant to your contract
Mhm.
and just ever. And so you can take that out.
Yeah. And so those even those standardized contracts can be negotiable, right? I mean, every contract is negotiable,
Absolutely.
right?
And there's a level of, I think if you want to negotiate your contract, I think that's cool. I think you come at it from the way of, here, what does this mean? Here's why I can't agree to that, or why I think that's unreasonable, and let's find something in the middle. That's the best way that's how a contract negotiation should be. It shouldn't be just like, cross through it, I'm not doing this. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
It's always a negotiation on both sides.
Yeah. So if a consumer goes to meet with a builder, or they get to the point of signing a contract, the builder hands it to them or emails it to them or whatever, what should they do with that contract at that point before they sign it?
So, if it's
The obvious is read it.
Yeah, read it. If it's big enough, it's a new build, I would have it reviewed by an attorney, just so so they can explain to you what it means from your side. And go through piece by piece, and if you have questions, ask, right? Because you don't want to get to the end of the middle of this thing and get a problem, you don't know what your contract means, right? Then
Yeah.
then it's not very effective at all.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of people who do that, who take the contract to an attorney for review. He'll cross out half of it, mark up half of it, and I get it back. It's like Swiss cheese. But normally we wind up somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
a lot of those notes and comments are just, hey, I'm making you aware of this. It's not like, I'm not expecting the builder to actually change this, because most of them won't, but this is the consequences of what you're signing. This is what you're entering into that you might not
Absolutely.
understand.
Exactly. And that's our job, right? It's not that you have to negotiate everything, but here's what it is, and then you can decide if that's important to you or not. And I do the same thing with the contractors, that, make sure they understand the contracts they're signing.
Yeah, just understanding the risks that you're entering into,
Absolutely.
because every contract is a risk at some level.
And at this level, you can negotiate. Like if you go open a credit card, you're not going to be able to negotiate that contract. So,
Right.
There's some contracts you can't negotiate, but like this, you definitely can.
Yeah. So if a contract is poorly written and it does kind of hit the fan, end up in court or arbitration or whatever, what controls the outcome at that point?
So then you're having a third party who is not party to your agreement, kind of decide. So in Texas, if you're in Texas, and every state is different.
Mhm.
Some states have this process you have to go through before you can sue a builder. Some states have, whole consumer board that protects residential consumers. But like in Texas specifically, before you can sue a builder, you got to send them a letter telling them everything that's wrong, and giving them a chance to correct it. So I think, that process needs to be followed. Then at that point, you're having somebody outside the agreement say what your agreement meant.
Mhm.
And then it's going to very expensive process, because they're going to use other evidence to try to, interpret the agreement between you. And that process by itself is just hugely expensive. And then
Mhm.
it never goes the way the party wants it to, right? Like the best you can hope for in litigation is to break even for both sides. That never happens.
Yeah.
Right. So like a homeowner client, I usually, unless it's substantial, the first thing we want to do if things go south between you and your builders, yes, we'll send the letter. Yes, we'll do that. But I want you to take your funds to finish your house, right? Like if you have limited funds, let's send the letter, reserve our rights, because they can't sue you unless they send the letter. But let's go forward with fixing the house, because that's the most important thing, or finishing the project, or moving back in, I talk to homeowner clients all the time. It's like, yes, we can get there, but I'd rather you spend your money that you have on finishing your house.
Yeah, for sure. So if if a contract doesn't have, those performance standards that we talked about a minute ago, if those aren't defined, who interprets that in court? Who interprets what's right and wrong?
Reasonableness standard by a judge or a jury that know nothing about construction. So, that's not good for either party.
Yeah.
But, I've taken several cases, jury trials from the builder side. Jurors and judges identify with homeowners before they do builders.
Yeah, because they are homeowners. Yeah.
Correct. And so when they see the punch list items blown up as like damages left, it's very dramatic. And it's very, oh, I can't believe you left the house this way. And to a contractor, it's very much, this is a punch list item that if you would let me finish, I could have gone and finished.
In a contract, what either documents or clauses, or what are some common things that are left out that should be there?
Let's see here. So we kind of went over change orders already. Schedule that. Okay, so things that should be in there that are left out sometimes. Okay, who has a right to terminate and what happens upon termination? Like if we can have a mutual termination, what are the? It's like a prenup almost, right? Like how are we gonna that I think is left out a lot, but it would be hugely important. It's like, okay, so once you sign a contract, you're both bound to perform. You're bound to build, and they're bound to pay you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we breach that contract, what happens? Is there a buyout provision where the builder can be like, hey, I know I breached the contract, but here's your limit on damages.
Yeah.
I know I've seen that in some contracts. Mm-hmm. And if the owner does it, you keep the deposit. Like, what does the breakup situation look like? And then the next fall, like if a party is in default, like you didn't get a payment or the builder didn't correct something, how long do they have to fix that before you can terminate them? So those are some of the big issues that I see that aren't commonly addressed in contracts, especially ones of new guys just started out, and they're not thinking of all these things that they need to go in the contract.
If things really do go south and they do go to court or arbitration or whatever, what does that cost typically? I know that's kind of hard to say because it depends, but are we talking like $10,000? Are we talking $1 million?
Hundreds of thousands to get ready. I have a big I represent homeowners, and their house is a mess. Most cases aren't that big, but hundreds of thousands it's going to take us to take this thing to arbitration.
Well,
to put on evidence, to get expert witnesses.
Well,
and that's from the homeowner side, right? And it's just as expensive from the contractor side.
But both sides will spend that much money.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I've heard that at least here in Texas, the court system's pretty backed up. I assume that's probably a nationwide problem. Like, how long does it even take for a case to go to trial if it does go to trial?
Yeah, so Harris County in Texas, we were already backed up because we had Harvey, and then our criminal courthouse was closed, so our civil courthouse got double booked, and it was everything. And then COVID hit. And so right now it used to be a year, and now it's closer to 2 or 3 before you can get before you get a trial.
Wow.
And that process that happens during that 2 or 3 years is very expensive. Arbitration is more expensive on the front end, but the discovery process is shorter. You have a private individual that's familiar with construction, so you're looking at under a year to get that done. It's less expensive in the long run. And
cost wise, is that less or more? Same?
So the actual cost that you have to pay the arbitrator because the independent party for his time. So the arbitration costs way more than filing a lawsuit, but the attorney's fees would be less.
Okay, it's just less time involved.
Correct.
It's not stretched
out. And
you
can't have, like in arbitration, you can't have the discovery disputes that you have at the courthouse because the rules are different. There's less rules in arbitration, meaning like all the evidence come in, all the witnesses come in, as opposed to the courthouse where you can fight about that all day long. And that becomes a very expensive process.
Right. Okay, so changing gears a little bit, let's talk about, from your perspective, what should people be looking for, aside from just having a contract like we've discussed? What are some things people should be looking for when they're hiring a builder or a contractor?
So I think, a contractor that's interested in them and what they want and what their goals are and ask those questions, I think is hugely important. I think reviews, I think if there's tons of bad reviews, if there's 1 or 2 bad reviews, I think that happens to every company at some point. But if there's all bad reviews, then I think that says something and they haven't responded, right? So Google searches, you can check the courthouse to see if they've been sued before by a homeowner, how that, because that's public record, how that went. Are they responsive to you? I think even on the front end, you can tell. And usually, and I tell my builder clients this all the time, trust your gut, right? Trust your gut. If it doesn't work, don't force it, right? Find somebody else.
Yeah.
Because I see, I knew I shouldn't have done this, or I knew I should have hired somebody else, or I knew I shouldn't have, that's most of the people that end up in my office are saying that. And so I really say trust your gut is a big one.
So most states have a licensing process for contractors. Texas does not for builders. So HVAC, electrical, plumbing, all the trades have some, or most of the trades have some licensure, but builders don't.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've always joked that in Texas, all you have to do is print a business card or slap a magnet on your truck, and boom, you're a builder.
The Wild Wild West out here, and so
Yeah.
there's pros and cons, right? The pros, it's free enterprise and buyer, some level buyer beware.
Mm-hmm.
The cons are there's no regulation, right? There's nobody to go to. There's no agency to go to if something goes south. So like, I know California has very specific contractor licenses, and you can file a complaint and they'll investigate, which is another way to try to resolve the issue before. I think it's good in that respect. So I think it's, it's got pros and cons. There was a point in time when Texas did it for a short period.
Yeah, for a few years. Yeah.
When the GHBA was formed and they did that, and the RECLA process has remained from that, but the licensing one has gone away. So apparently it didn't work out enough to stay.
Yeah, I think the lobbying kind of won out there.
Exactly. And like I said, so it puts it a lot more on the owner to do a lot more research to protect themselves. And just because they're a builder doesn't mean, you're really going to have to do some research.
Not that this is the end all be all for choosing a builder, but there are some accreditations and designations and things like that builders earn that at least shows that, hey, they're pursuing some education, they're spending some time working on their business and their knowledge. So I would say at least look for a builder who has some letters after his name
and a website that you can kind of see his work, and I think all that's important. Absolutely.
One of your specialties is lien laws, like we discussed a minute ago. So homeowners probably, or many homeowners probably aren't familiar with what those are. So tell us about what are the types of liens that are involved in this process and how those work.
Yeah, so a lien is to protect unpaid contractors for work that they had done, and so that can either come from your prime contractor, which is the one who you hired, which that's called a constitutional lien, and there's very little requirements on what they have to do to perfect that lien, except if it's a homestead, then they have more requirements. But then the people that work for them also can file liens if they're not paid. And so in Texas, before we get a pay app, are you making the builder sign an all bills paid affidavit or waivers along the way? Because at the end of the day, that in Texas, the owner is holding a pool of funds, which is 10% of the contract amount, to satisfy lien claimants if they don't get paid. And so if they get notices, if the owner gets notices that people have remained unpaid, those need to be investigated before any further payments made. Because if you don't, you could end up paying twice. And so what a lien is a security interest in the project. It's just like a mortgage, except it's filed by somebody who's owed money. So there's certain notice requirements that have to be met, but it is a very strong remedy. And it can, for most homeowners, it can lengthen out their process because they can't go to final closing, they can't get permanent financing, they can't sell the house because there's a lien, and so it is a lot of leverage, and so it needs to be taken very seriously.
Yeah, so it's not just the builder or the subcontractor; it can also be the material supplier,
Correct.
which some people aren't aware of. So, like if you buy a bunch of lumber in the lumber yard and the lumber yard doesn't get paid, the lumber yard can send a lien notice for your house.
Absolutely. And so in Texas, if they do that, it's the 15th day of the second month that they need to send their notices to the owner. So if you get one of those, don't rely on what the builder says. Contact the supplier directly.
Yeah.
And make sure they get paid, because it could result in a lien. And I see that happen a lot. I represent material suppliers, and that the owner's like, well, I just turned it over to the contractor. They told me to take care of it. And then they end up with a lien, and it's a big mess.
Right. So 15th day of the second month. So you're essentially 45 days out.
Yes.
From when the stuff was purchased.
Correct.
And now you're getting notice that they're not paid.
Correct.
And the homeowner may have already paid the contractor for that, or the bank released some funds or whatever.
Yeah. And so being just very on top of that, and knowing that those are real notices, and they really do mean something.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I'll say this. it's always good to have a discussion with the builder also, because, find out what's going on in the builder's world that's causing that.
Yeah.
Because there may be,
They may have paid the sub, and the sub didn't pay the material supplier, and
right.
the builder's trying to jump in and take care of it.
Yeah. And also just having that relationship where you can call them and say, hey, I noticed we got this lien. Is everything okay with you? Are you staying in business? Are you guys having problems? Or, just kind
How
of.
do you feel about a builder as a builder when they ask you that, though?
No, so honestly, about 10 years ago, this happened to me. Like our company was going through some rough stuff, and we had a lien notice sent on a customer, and the customer did that. He called me. He's like, hey, Curtis, so we got this in the mail. Should I be concerned? What's the deal? And I said, nope, we're good. We went through a few weeks where we had a project fall through and a bunch of stuff that came up, but I've got it taken care of now. So having that open line of communication with the builder to where you're on good terms and you can just say, hey, I know you're human.
Exactly.
You may have just made a mistake. It's cool. We can work it out. That's important too.
No, I absolutely agree. So there, there's a fine line of, yes, I believe you now. I need that lien waiver too.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I've said this on multiple episodes in this podcast. As I definitely preach trust but verify.
Exactly. Didn't Ronald Reagan say that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
for sure. Yeah.
I think I quoted that somewhere once or twice.
I love that line.
I know.
Changing gears a little bit, I think there are types of people who are very well suited to go through this custom home process, building a home, and there's some people that probably shouldn't go through this process, just personality types or people in different stages of life. So what's your thought on that?
If you're a control freak, you probably shouldn't. Just because there are so many variables, there's so many things always changing, and it's a stressful process. Even the best of projects are a stressful process.
Yeah.
Trying to keep schedule, trying to organize people, trying to handle things as they come, and it's a lot. It's hard. It's not an easy thing. So if you want to be a control freak and like be there every day managing the project, you probably should just buy a house that's built already.
Yeah.
Maybe have it modified a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of good houses on the market that you can
Exactly.
just go buy and move
And it's
into.
a lot less stressful for you and for
Yeah.
save everybody some time.
I think people on both ends of the spectrum, people who are total control freaks and people who are just totally disinterested, both can be a big problem, because
Absolutely.
people who are totally disinterested, they may not engage in the process, and then something
Get to the end
and then something comes up and they're like, oh, why is that like that?
and you're like, wait.
Well,
Yeah, that would probably be me. It's like, sounds good at the time, but then when I see it, I'm like,
yeah, and we've had that happen too, where we go to install some windows and somebody's like, why are we installing those windows? I'm like, it's the ones you picked out and it's the ones that are in the contract. Well, I don't like those windows. Okay,
Yeah.
well, we have a problem now.
Exactly. So you can pay to replace the windows or pay more attention. But then you have the other side, right? Like people that take a month to pick something out. And so I always put that in the contract too, is that the contractor schedule may change if you don't pick out the selections in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
Because I've seen that happen time and time again. Like it takes them like 3 weeks. The contractor's moved on or had to move people to another place. And then it takes them a minute to get it back to where they were.
Yeah. That kind of goes back to just engaging in the process, saying, hey, I'm going to build a custom home with a builder. I'm entering into this 2-year-long relationship. I need to participate. I need to like take part in meetings. I need to listen and read my emails and
Exactly.
Just pay attention to what's going on. Otherwise, things are going to go awry.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. So, do you have any stories? I'm sure you do, but any good anecdotal tales of projects that went horribly awry? That and then maybe talk a little bit about like what could have been done differently to avoid that.
Yeah, so I had a masonry contractor that was working directly for the owners. Didn't have a contract, said he would do the scope of work. Got out there, did a little mock-up. Owners approved. He started going at it and did half of the house. And it was a substantial size project. And he wasn't upfront with the owners about the products they have chosen were natural and that they would vary throughout the project. And that the mortar they picked was could vary, and they were pissed when they got home and half the house was done and that's not what they expected, and he wasn't upfront about that, and so they took him all the way to trial. He didn't have a contract, so it was very expensive.
Wow.
And then the jurors saw that this was an incompleted project, and yeah, he lost. And they wouldn't settle along the way. So we did try. But I mean, in that case, there was no expectations. And things like that are nuanced, like, hey, this is a natural product. There's going to be some variance, and being upfront about things like that. Again, managing expectations is a huge thing. So no contract, obviously, but even with one, take the time to go through it with the client so they understand.
Masonry is one of those things that I think actually has a lot of room for interpretation. like we've had multiple disputes over the years involving masonry.
Mm-hmm.
Because mortar color can be a little bit different than the sample looked like, or
Exactly.
There's a lot of different interpretations of this thing that's popular right now, like a schmear or a mortar wash on brick.
Gotcha.
A lot of different ways to do that, and I wanted it heavier, I wanted it lighter. It's the wrong color. It's like it's really hard to tell what your whole house is going to look like from a 2 square foot sample.
Yeah.
A lot of disputes over that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that's all we have for today. I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And if people who are either builders or homeowners want to work with you or talk to you about a project, how do they find you?
So the CromeensLawFirm.com is the main source. I'm on all the social platforms. Facebook, LinkedIn, all the good things. They can reach out there too. I'm pretty active on there. So yeah, we're here for all the things.
Awesome. And also, she does have her own podcast, as I mentioned earlier, called Quit Getting Screwed. So if you're a contractor, it probably interests you more, but definitely check out her podcast. And I will link her podcast and website and all that stuff in the show notes on this podcast. So again, thanks so much for being here. It was great.
So thanks for having me. I hope I could be helpful.
Definitely. All right, that wraps it up for today. And again, as I said at the beginning, every project has to have those 4 key components. We touched on some of that today. The foundation is planning, the left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof, protecting it all, is proper execution. If you have all those components, your project will succeed. So be sure to join us next week. Hope to see you then. Bye.